With the 15th pick and with the 26th pick in the 2019 NFL Draft, the Washington Redskins select Dwayne Haskins, Montez Sweat.
Welcome, all my fellow Redskin brethren and sister. I am your man and resident Redskins fan, Lou. Thank you for joining me here on the Redskins Report. Fight to 53 as the Redskins play their final preseason game tonight at home versus the Baltimore Ravens. I wanted to get this video out in advance of the game, talk about what I think the roster is going to look like at the Saturday 4 o'clock p.m. deadline to trim these rosters down from 90 to 53. I think that the Redskins have some tough decisions to make towards the back end of the roster. For the most part, there's probably about 48, 49 roster spots pretty much etched in stone at this point. You're not really going to see 9 or 10 positions filled tonight in the action that you're going to see on the field. For the most part, there are probably literally about 3 or 4 guys that legitimately have a shot to make this roster, and with a good performance could make the 53-man roster, and with a subpar performance will probably find their way to the practice squad unless they find work elsewhere and get picked up on waivers once they get released. So it's going to be interesting to see who separates themselves tonight to give themselves the best chance to make this roster. But as I mentioned before, the roster is pretty much set in stone. We pretty much know who's going to make it. Again, there are probably and I've got about 2 or 3 guys that I went back and forth on that may not make this roster, may make this roster. I feel good about my 53-man roster this year, even better so than I did last year. So I'm going to give you what I think is going to happen. Obviously, this is subject to change, barring injury. We're going to knock on some wood here. Barring injury tonight. If these guys stay relatively healthy throughout the course of the night, then I anticipate that the 53-man roster will look something like this. So I have a breakdown of 25 offensive players, 25 defensive players, and your 3 specialists. So last year, I think my breakdown was 26 on the defensive side, 24 on offense, 3 specialists. So this year got an even balance of 25-25. We'll see if it actually works out that way or not. But in any event, let's jump into this roster and what I think is going to take place and what I think the Redskins are going to ultimately do with their 53-man roster for the upcoming season. So I'll also give you the 10 guys that I think are going to make it onto the Redskins practice squad as well. So let's go ahead and jump into this breakdown. So we start on the offensive side of the football. The guys that you see in burgundy outlined in yellow are your roster locks. For me, the guys that you see in the burgundy with white outline in smaller print, those are the guys that I think are going to ultimately end up on some type of list, whether it be the practice squad or the PUP list to start the season off, or some other list that they're going to put these players on other than the 53-man roster, but they're going to still be a part of this team when it's all said and done in some type of capacity. So let's jump through this offensive side of the football first. You start with the quarterback position. I think this is a no-brainer. There was a discussion very briefly. I mean, it was a fleeting discussion whether the Redskins would even entertain the possibility of only keeping 2 quarterbacks. I think we all know that that's not going to happen. And it's amazing that just 2 weeks ago, we got really excited after the Bengals game at home. We thought that there was a chance Dwayne Haskins could potentially even start week 1. But even then, not starting week 1, we thought that timeline had moved up, and maybe, if things didn't go well early, and no one's hoping for that, but if things didn't go well early, you could see him as early as week 3 or 4. I'm thinking now, and what I'm hearing and I'm gathering from people that are close to the situation is that, as Colt McCoy gets healthier and is able to start to take reps and feel good and not have any ill effects after taking practice snaps and reps and feeling good on his leg, I'm thinking that he assumes the number 2 spot immediately. And there's a case that we don't see Dwayne Haskins at all until the end of the season if things go awry. But if things are relatively competitive throughout, there's a chance that if Case struggles, Colt goes in and not Dwayne. So there could be a situation, and there are people in the organization, most notably the people that matter the most in Bruce and Dan, that really feel like this guy doesn't need to play in 2019. If at all possible, let's keep him on ice, let him learn. And I don't really love that strategy. If the Redskins are competitive, I totally get it. But I want to see Dwayne Haskins get some reps, get some meaningful snaps in 2019. We'll see what happens. Obviously, the Redskins are keeping 3 quarterbacks, though. I think that's the overriding theme there, is that there was a question as to whether maybe they could only keep 2. Maybe they might trade one of these veteran quarterbacks that they have and just have one guy and Dwayne backing that guy up. And if something were to go wrong, Dwayne goes in. Nah, I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's Case to start the season off, Colt backing him up. And in case of an emergency, Dwayne Haskins will be ready to then go in. No guys on this roster that are going to be eligible for the practice squad. And so you just move on to the running back position. Going to keep 4 running backs there. I think this is a pretty easy position to break down. Although I told you after last week's game, I actually like Craig Reynolds. I know that Jay loves Samaje Perine. There's no way Craig Reynolds has an opportunity to make this 53-man roster. But that being said, I actually like what I've seen from him, so much so that I think he's a practice squad candidate. I'll talk about that here in a second. But obviously the 4 backs are Adrian Peterson, all right, Chris Thompson, Darius Geis, Samaje Perine. Those are your 4 backs that are going to make this football team. Craig Reynolds is a guy that I think has earned his way onto the practice squad. I really like what I've seen from him. And in the event of an injury, before Bryce Love being ready, let's say Samaje turns an ankle running down on special teams, I think you could see a guy like Craig Reynolds brought up from the practice squad. But Bryce Love is another guy that is down below in parentheses. He's going to start the season off on the PUP list. I honestly could see this guy, or potentially IR and short-term IR, and see him come back later on in the season. Either way, I wouldn't be shocked to see Bryce Love later on in the season. I wouldn't be shocked if we didn't see him at all in 2019. There's really no rush on Bryce Love. You just want him to be fully healthy whenever he comes back, whether that's week 9 or week 12 of this season, or it's off to next year and we don't see him until next season. Whatever the case may be, just keep in mind that we have another dynamic back in Bryce Love that will be entering this roster at some point, whether this year or next. So don't forget about Bryce Love and what he brings to the table as a dynamic threat out of the backfield. 3 tight ends are going to be kept. Again, another one of these easy positions to kind of write in. You can write this position in marker if you like. It's not changing. It's Jordan Reed. It's Vernon Davis. It's Jeremy Sprinkle. Now, obviously, the injury to Jordan Reed could change some things for week 1, but highly unlikely. I've listened to Jay talk. There hasn't been much reporting on Jordan Reed's concussion protocol, but because we were so far out from the regular season, when that took place, you're still talking about a full 2.5 weeks before the Redskins suit up for Philadelphia. I think that's why the Redskins weren't in that big of a rush to either make a move or feel like a guy that like J.P. Holtz or one of the other tight ends could step in. But Jay has referenced J.P. Holtz numerous times. And so he's the guy that I think is going to make the practice squad. He's the guy that I think gives them a better blocking tight end if they need to pull someone up. If Jeremy Sprinkle were to go down, let's say Sprinkle was the one to go down, J.P. Holtz would be the guy that would fill that void as your primary blocking tight end. I don't think they like any of the other guys in that role. I think he's the one guy that can fill that void. And so J.P. Holtz is a guy that I think is going to make the practice squad at the tight end position. So then you go to the receivers, and this is probably the biggest position of debate. I've talked about it all offseason long, all preseason long, how this wide receiver position is unproven and it's untested, and we don't know what we're going to get out of them. We don't have a lot of veteran presence on this group, and so you didn't really know what to expect, and then injuries haven't helped us identify who are the guys that we can lean on. Haven't seen a ton of Terry McLaurin, haven't seen a ton of Trey Quinn this preseason. The quarterback position doesn't make it any easier either, because those guys haven't been the best. And then you take it a step further, the offensive line has been in shambles and mixed match parts throughout the preseason. So that doesn't help the receivers either. So this position, you could go in a number of ways, and I wouldn't knock your list. If you said, hey, the Redskins are keeping 7, not 6, I would listen, and I might not even disagree with that. But at the end of the day, I think the Redskins aren't going to go unconventional and keep 7 receivers. That's just too many. You don't need 7 guys at one position, especially wide receiver, on your roster. It just doesn't make any sense. So I think 6 is the limit that the Redskins, and remember, there was once upon a time when 5 was as many as you were going to keep. 6 was a ton. 6 isn't that bad anymore. 7 is ridiculous. I just don't see the Redskins doing that. So there's been a lot of talk of Josh Doctson being traded. I don't think he's getting traded. Here's why. If they tried to trade him last year, which reports are out there, and we heard it last year that they tried to move him, that would have been the time. If you are a team looking to try to see if you can get the most out of Josh Doctson, maybe a change of scenery will do him some good. Last year would have been the time to trade for him. Why? Because there was still an extra year on his contract. You trade for Josh Doctson this year, it's a 1-year rental. And what if he goes and balls out? Now, again, that's highly unlikely, but still, it just doesn't make any sense for a team. Even if you incur an injury, there are other guys that are going to get cut from NFL rosters that you feel comfortable bringing in and working with. Josh Doctson, to me, just doesn't strike me as a guy that's going to command a lot of interest on the trade block. And so I think the Redskins are going to hold on. I think I've likened it to a used car before in the past, but I'll just give you this analogy again. It's almost like you having a used car. It's bought, it's paid for, it's yours, you own the title, but you want to sell it for, $5,000. And the most anyone is willing to give you for it is $3,000. That car is worth more to you than you just getting rid of it for $3,000. And so I feel like Josh Doctson is a guy that, he's never going to be the number 1 option, the first round draft pick we drafted him to be. He's never going to be that guy, but he's a veteran. He led our team in receiving last year. We don't know what we're getting out of the rest of the receivers on this football team. I think there's a comfort level in knowing that Josh Doctson is out there, and so I think he's going to make this football team. Trey Quinn is going to make this football team. Terry McLaurin and Paul Richardson are both locks. Cam Sims and Kelvin Harmon are also young guys that I think the Redskins just don't want to expose to waivers. I just don't think you're in a position to put those guys on waivers and expect them to clear waivers and be able to stash them away on your practice squad. So the Redskins are going to keep those 6 wide receivers. I think Robert Davis is a guy that has made some plays this year, but this is why I think the Redskins aren't going to keep Robert Davis. And it really, I brought this up, but I did it briefly, almost in passing during the last preseason game. Robert Davis didn't play a bunch of snaps. Remember I said, why isn't Robert Davis playing? That's a tactic that NFL teams use very often when they're trying to sneak a guy onto the practice squad. If you allow a guy to play and he continues to make plays, other teams around the league take notice, and all of a sudden, somebody's eyeballing your stuff, you cut it loose, they pick it up, snatch it off of waivers, and you don't get to stash that guy away on your practice squad. So in order to hide a guy and get him to your practice squad, you don't play him during the preseason in certain spots. Week 3 preseason game should have been one where you were definitely displaying Robert Davis if he was going to make this football team. Only thing we saw Robert Davis do was recover a fumbled and muffed punt on special teams. He didn't get a lot of run in the preseason game number 3. And so that tells me the Redskins were doing their best to hide him. It's not like we had a bunch of starters out there for a bunch of reps. He could have gotten a lot of run in the 3rd preseason game versus Atlanta, and he didn't. And I think that was the Redskins sign that they're trying to stash this guy away on the practice squad. And so I don't think he's going to be on the 53-man roster. Steven Sims has impressed Jay Gruden and the rest of this staff, but they still think he has a ways to go, especially learning the playbook. And so I think he's a guy that also helps on special teams. They're excited about what the future can be for Steven Sims, but he's not ready to go right now. And I think he's a guy that they stash away on the practice squad. And then Darvin Kidsey is a guy that I think has gotten way too much love from Redskins fans over the last couple of weeks. I've heard this guy go from, relative unknown for the last couple of preseasons. He's been a standout, but relative a roster unknown to a bubble guy to a Darvin Kidsey should be on the roster. I'm like, are you kidding me? No, Darvin Kidsey, not only is he not on the roster, I don't even know if he's a practice squad guy. I don't know if the Redskins intend on keeping 3 wide receivers on their practice squad. Now, in the event that a Robert Davis or a Steven Sims gets snatched up and ends up elsewhere, that's when I think a guy like Darvin Kidsey potentially ends up on your practice squad. Now, obviously, it's a fluid situation because other positions may be attacked, and some guys that you would like to keep on your practice squad may end up elsewhere, and it may open up a roster spot on the practice squad for Darvin Kidsey. But right now, I've got him on the outside looking in. That's why he's not even on the list. But again, there are guys that I will mention later on in this breakdown that may not be around for the Redskins to sign to their practice squad, and that would open up a roster spot potentially on the practice squad for a guy like Darvin Kidsey. So you go from there to the offensive line, and you start with the starters. Obviously, Donald Penn, Eric Flowers, Chase Roullier, Brandon Sheriff, Morgan Moses from left to right. Those guys are making the football team. I know a lot of you do not want Eric Flowers starting. I am among that group. But however, the Redskins are not giving up on this experiment. And I think that's something we still have to take into consideration, even though I don't want to hear it. He's still young at the guard position. This is a guy that has played guard for all of probably 5 weeks because he was still messing around at left tackle with the Trent Williams situation and some of the injuries the Redskins had at left tackle. So they had to go and put him at left tackle for the early portion of training camp until they signed the Robinson kid, until Jaron Christian came back, and it started to give them the flexibility to move him back to guard. So hasn't had all the work at guard that you would like him to at this point, but I don't think that's going to change his feet and his movement skills. All of those things to me are what they are. And so you're going to have those lapses in concentration. You're going to have those times where he just pure gets beat. Flat out can't stay in front of a guy, but the Redskins refuse to give up on this experiment. So as of right now, he's still the starter. I don't know how long that's going to last, however, but you keep hearing Jay Gruden, and I really hope this doesn't come to fruition, but you keep hearing Jay Gruden talk about Eric Flowers' flexibility and his ability to play both tackle positions in a pinch if need be. And I'm like, if it ever comes to that, we're in trouble already before he even sets foot at left tackle. If he has to shift from guard to tackle, we already are in trouble. That means we're decimated on the offensive line. That means not only has Donald Penn went down, but Jaron Christian has probably gone down as well, or Morgan Moses. Either way, you're down 2 starting tackles by that point. If you're talking about a guy like Eric Flowers playing tackle. So either way, I think it's the versatility, and they still aren't willing to concede that he's just not a starting caliber guard in this league quite yet. So those are your starting 5. And then you're going to have 4 backup linemen. I think you could possibly even see the Redskins keep 10. I'm going to go with 9 for the sake of this 53-man roster projection. I've got Wes Martin. I've got Jaron Christian, Tony Bergstrom, and Ross Piercebaker as your 4 backup offensive linemen that give you some versatility. Jaron Christian will be your swing tackle. Tony Bergstrom in a pinch, much like Eric Flowers, can play tackle. But again, he's going to be a guy that serves as your backup center and can play both guard positions. And Ross Piercebaker is going to be primarily your backup center. So there's a nice mix there. And then Wes Martin is a guy that we feel like is going to ultimately start at left guard before it's all said and done. So those are your 9 offensive linemen. I've got Zach Kieran on the practice squad as a guy that, you know, in a pinch, if you have some injuries, hurt the Redskins, as we've seen, let's knock on a little bit of wood, as we've seen in the past, he's a guy that they could bring up from the practice squad and feel comfortable with him stepping in and not being totally lost, not necessarily keeping the level of play solid, but at least not being lost. He has been here for the last couple of seasons, so he knows the scheme, knows what he'll have to do, that sort of thing. And then obviously the elephant in the room, Trent Williams. Don't know what list the Redskins are going to put him on, but he's going to be on some sort of list if he doesn't show up week 1. There's been a report out that D'Angelo Hall said he spoke to Trent, and Trent told him there's 0 chance he's showing up for week 1. So again, there's also a report that Bruce Allen has said there's no chance we're trading Trent Williams. So right now, that situation has a chance to get ugly. I've talked about it ad nauseum. I don't really want to keep harping on it. I've already said they need to trade him. And I told you guys this about a month ago that Trent wasn't coming back. And a lot of you gave me flack for it. A lot of you told me I needed to take the video down. There were people that said, when he comes back, I need you to take this video down. And I said, he's not coming back. I wouldn't have done the video if I thought there was a chance that he was coming back to play for the Redskins. So those are your offensive linemen. And then, of course, you've got Trent Williams on some sort of list to start out the season, and Zach Kieran on the practice squad, which gives you a total of 5 guys on the offensive side that make the practice squad, with Darvin Kidsey potentially making the practice squad if one of those guys or someone on the defensive side ends up getting signed by another team. So now we go to the defensive side of the football. And as I mentioned, 25 players over there as well. So 25, 25, and 3 with the specialists. As you look at the defensive line, without a doubt, the strength of this football team. I honestly think that they could keep 5 here. But I think Ryan B has been so good this preseason. He's been exceptional. I know a lot of you haven't been paying attention. He's the tall, lanky number 62 that gets out there right after the starters come out. He looks like an offensive lineman. That's because he used to be an offensive lineman and converted from offensive line to defensive line. He still has that offensive lineman type of body, but he's got quickness, he's got length, and he finds the football. He's got a nose for the football. I think his play this preseason is going to force the Redskins to make a tough decision. Either you expose him to waivers and risk losing him, and don't think for 1 second other teams haven't caught on to what Ryan B has done. And again, he is very raw at the position of defensive lineman. He has so much growth left, and that's the thing that's most intriguing about Ryan B. And because of that, some team will be willing to take him, sign him to their 53-man roster, and work with him. I think the Redskins are going to have to bite the bullet and do it themselves. If you cut this guy, and I think he would be a better practice squad guy. He can put on some weight. He can continue to get better, work on his craft. But I don't think you can risk exposing him to waivers, because I think he's going to get picked up by someone. I think the Redskins are going to have to bite the bullet there and keep 6. They always keep 6 defensive linemen. All right, he would be filling the Ziggy Hood role, essentially from last year. But in any event, Matt Ioannidis, Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, Tim Settle, Caleb Brantley, all locks. And I think Ryan B rounds out that group. If he doesn't make the football team, he's a lock to make the practice squad if no other team snatches him off of waivers. But I've got him making the football team because I think he wouldn't clear waivers. I think someone else would sign him if the Redskins were to cut him loose. Linebacker. You've got 9 linebackers on this football team to start out the season. And you're going to have 4 outside linebackers. Those guys are Ryan Kerrigan, Montez Sweat, Ryan Anderson, and Casanova McKenzie. That's an easy group to identify there. Now, there would have been 5 outside linebackers had Jordan Brailford, our 7th round pick out of Oklahoma State, been healthy this camp. I'm convinced he would have made the football team, and I think the Redskins really like this kid. And so they're holding out hope that he'll get healthy and maybe be able to contribute down the road this season. If not, they may just put him on IR. They may just stash him away on the practice squad and then work with him there. Either way, Jordan Brailford, I think, is going to start out the season either on the PUP list or on IR. I'm assuming it's going to be the PUP list. So that'll give him a chance to fully heal, and then they'll get to see if they want to keep this guy around or not. Or they could put him on IR and he won't play at all this year, and that would allow them to not have to worry about a roster spot for him, but know that he'll be on this roster next year. So we'll see what they do with Jordan Brailford, but those are your 4 edge rushers as of right now. At the linebacker position, inside linebacker, you've got 5 guys right now: John Bostic, Sean Dion Hamilton, Cole Holcomb, Josh Harvey Clemens, and Marquise Flowers rounds out that group. Now, Marquise Flowers only is making the team because, as I mentioned, Jordan Brailford would have been that 5th outside linebacker, which would have taken away one of the inside linebacker spots. But because there is no extra outside linebacker, you get an extra inside linebacker position opened up, and they're going to give that to Marquise Flowers because he can contribute on special teams. he was the better of the two between he and B.J. Blunt, and I think they feel like he can contribute on special teams. Every time we saw one of our starting inside linebackers not play, the first guy off the bench was Marquise Flowers, so that leads me to believe he'll round out this group as your fifth and final inside linebacker. When you look at the practice squad, to me, B.J. Blunt is a lock to make the practice squad. That's a guy that I think the Redskins want to continue to work with. And then Gary Johnson is a guy that I talked about on a video about a week and a half ago. We haven't seen much of him during the preseason. I think we're going to see a ton of him tonight. And I'm anxious to see what he does tonight will determine whether the Redskins are intrigued enough by him to stash him away on the practice squad. If he goes out 9 tackles tonight all over the football field, the speed is apparent, then he's a guy that I think can be on the practice squad. If he is obscure tonight, we don't notice Gary Johnson, number 55, on the football field, and we don't call his name, he's a guy that could easily not be on this Redskins practice squad and will be back out on the streets again. So we'll see what happens. But I got right now Gary Johnson being on the practice squad for the Redskins. And as I mentioned before, Jordan Brailford is a guy that I think ultimately going to end up on some type of list to start the season, most likely the PUP list, if the Redskins feel like this guy can contribute at some point this year. If they feel like we don't really have the roster spot for him even when he comes back, which they do if they want to get rid of Marquise Flowers, they will then have that extra roster spot. Either way, if they say, you know what, we'll just let this guy heal up and we'll see what we can do with him next year, then they'll just throw IR on him like they did with Cam Sims last season. So we'll see what happens with Jordan Brailford. But we go to the defensive back position, and now you look at this, and this was another position of debate, and I think there is a legitimate roster spot available tonight up for grabs with the play of one player in particular, and that player is Adonis Alexander. The Redskins spent a supplemental draft pick on him last year. They really want to see this thing come to fruition. They don't want to admit that they made a mistake on Adonis Alexander. He hasn't been healthy this entire camp in preseason. He's going to get one shot and one shot only. He only has one shot. Do not miss your chance to go because opportunity knocks once in a lifetime. He better go tonight versus the Ravens and make some plays. If he doesn't, I think he's not going to make this football team. And I don't think the Redskins will be able to get him onto the practice squad. I don't. His length, his ability is going to intrigue some teams out there. I think he fits perfectly in what the Buccaneers want to do with what they're doing with their secondary with these long, bigger corners. Obviously, he fits the profile of a Seattle Seahawks corner. There are other teams in the league that like their corners long and active like an Adonis Alexander. So I don't see the Redskins getting him back if he doesn't make the 53-man roster, but that's not to say that he hasn't done enough this year that teams aren't all that intrigued by him and that the Redskins could sneak him on the practice squad. But his name is one that is known around league circles, and if you liked him 2 years ago at Virginia Tech, then he's a guy that if he gets cut, you may say, hey, I want to bring this guy in and see what he can bring to our roster. So I just don't know if the Redskins will be able to get him back. But he's got a legitimate shot at making the roster tonight. If he goes out and balls, I think then you see a guy like Greg Stroman potentially not making the football team. I think it's I said it when I did the cornerbacks breakdown that it's between Greg Stroman and Adonis Alexander for that one roster spot, because I think Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie being a veteran and being able to play multiple positions, I just don't see them cutting bait with him and the influence he's had on not just the corners, but even the young receivers. I just don't think Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie is going anywhere. And also, and I know this shouldn't matter, and it probably doesn't, but I think there is a little bit of psychology here, and that's Landon Collins' boy. And so I think just having him around makes it a better environment for all of those guys involved. I just don't see DRC going anywhere. So here are your corners within the 10 DB selection for this roster. You've got 6 cornerbacks making this football team: Josh Norman, Quentin Dunbar, Fabian Moreau, Jimmy Moreland. Those are all locks. Those 4 guys, without a doubt, on the football team. I think Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, as I mentioned before, I don't think he's a lock, but I think he's the next thing. I think he's the next sure thing, all right, if there's such a thing. So he's the 5th corner. And then I think there's a legitimate roster spot battle tonight between Greg Stroman and Adonis Alexander. Whomever performs the best, and remember, Greg Stroman also gives you something on special teams, which I think could put him over the top. But again, If Adonis Alexander can show why the Redskins spent a supplemental draft pick on him just a couple of drafts ago, then I think he's the guy that gets that final spot. But again, he's right now on the outside looking in. The best ability is availability. He hasn't been available. And so right now, Greg Stroman has that final roster spot for the Redskins at the cornerback position. Then you go to the 4 safeties that will occupy this roster to give you 10 defensive backs. Monte Nicholson, Landon Collins, Troy Apke, DeShazer Everett are your 4 safeties. That's not changing to me. Now, there could be a 5th safety added on, and to me, this is the debate I had back and forth. Do you keep a 6th defensive lineman in Ryan B, or do you keep a 5th safety in safety Jeremy Reeves, who has looked so good this preseason? I think that's a real debate that the Redskins are having internally. I think you can sneak Jeremy Reeves onto the practice squad. I don't think you're going to get Ryan B onto the practice squad. And I think that's what it all boils down to. If you ask me which one of these 2 guys can help you the most in 2019, I tell you it's Jeremy Reeves. He's going to help you on special teams. And if injuries come to the safety position, I actually like what he's done and feel comfortable with him stepping in for a few snaps per game or even a week or 2 if need be. He's looked that good this preseason, has Jeremy Reeves. So I think with more polish and more time practicing, he could easily be a guy that can contribute. But if you're asking me which one of these guys could you get onto the practice squad, I'll tell you without a heartbeat and hesitation, it's Jeremy Reeves. And I think that's something the Redskins have to take into consideration. If you allow Ryan B to hit waivers, I think someone's going to snatch him up. I think if you allow Jeremy Reeves to hit waivers, no one's going to come calling and you can stash him away on the practice squad. So I think that Jeremy Reeves has a legitimate shot, and it would not shock me if he made this football team at all. Not one iota. All right. But I have him on the outside looking in because I think they can get him on the practice squad along with Adonis Alexander on the practice squad right now. That could easily be Greg Stroman on the practice squad if someone else doesn't snatch those guys up. I think whomever doesn't make the cornerback position tonight between Adonis Alexander and Greg Stroman, I think they're going to end up on another football team. I honestly believe that, and that's why I have a guy like Deion Harris as someone that could potentially be on the practice squad along with Darvin Kidsey, because I think whomever doesn't make the team as that 6th and final corner, I think someone else is going to snatch that player up and they're going to end up on another NFL roster. I really believe that in my heart of hearts. So I've got 2, 4, 5 guys on the practice squad, 6 if you count Adonis Alexander on the practice squad. I don't know. And again, Gary Johnson he's on that borderline. He's got to play his ass off tonight to make the Redskins practice squad, but we will see what happens. And then obviously you've got Nick Sundberg, Tress Way, Dustin Hopkins as your 3 specialists. That isn't changing. Those guys are locks to make the roster. So if you ask me, the 5 guys on the defensive side of the football that will make the practice squad are Gary Johnson, B.J. Blunt, Jeremy Reeves, Adonis Alexander are your 5 guys, or 4, and then Deion Harris would be the 5th. Now, again, I don't think that Adonis Alexander clears waivers. I don't think Greg Stroman clears waivers. And if that is in fact the case, then I think you see a guy like Darvin Kidsey be added to the practice squad as the 10th and final member of the Redskins 2019 practice squad. But those are your 53 men that I think are going to make this Redskins roster. It's very intriguing to see how this thing shakes out. It's going to be interesting to see how these guys perform tonight. Again, the final preseason game is dreadful. It's a chore to watch. I'm glad Haskins is playing. We don't know for how long he's going to play, but that's going to make at least the first half of this game tolerable. The second half could get a little dicey. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't know for how long I'm going to hang around in the second half. If it gets really ugly and we don't have a lot to talk about, I probably will dip out on you guys early. But if we are having some serious conversations and the action on the field isn't too bad, I may stick around for the duration of the second half as well. But hey, don't count on me sticking around for the entire second half. I will bail on y'all in a heartbeat if things start to go south with the game and we're not talking about anything in the comment section. I will go deuces on y'all quick and we will end the stream and we'll get the hell out of Dodge. That's part of the reason why I wanted to put this out before the game, so that we will have a working dialogue during the game and something kind of to work off of. This is going to be our foundation of a roster. And then if you have questions, we can go back and forth and kind of talk about the roster. And maybe you disagree with one or two people that I put on the roster or have on the outside looking in, and we can have that dialogue back and forth. But in any event, I am a Redskins fan, etched in burgundy and gold. My Redskins spirit will never die. Redskins spirit will never fold until we meet again. Hail to our beloved Washington Redskins. I will see you guys tonight for the Redskins' fourth and final preseason game at home versus the Baltimore Ravens. Remember, no starters in this game, all backups, guys fighting to make some kind of NFL roster. A lot of those guys will not make this roster in particular, but there are some spots available at the very back end of this roster, about 3 or 4 to be exact. And there also are 10 practice squad roster spots available that these guys will be vying for. I think a lot of those are already locked up as well, but we will see how these guys go out and perform. And obviously seeing Dwayne Haskins play is also going to be a little bit of incentive for us to watch the game as well. But until then, I'm your man, Louie T, signing off. I'll see you guys tonight. Join me as we watch the final preseason game of 2019. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Yes. I'll see you guys then. Have a good one.
Louie T Network.